General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
An extraordinary moment in June of 1987 when Ronald Reagan went to the wall. Of course, few imagined at the time that would ever happen. Mikhail Gorbachev, though, ended up being the final leader of the Soviet Union, and along with Ronald Reagan, oversaw the end of the Cold War. He, of course, died at the age of 91. NBC News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Andrea Mitchell has details.
Mikhail Gorbachev, the communist leader whose brief 6-year reign transformed the map of Europe and the world. The first Soviet leader with a larger vision for his country, and who was willing to hold a summit with Ronald Reagan, the American president who called the Soviet Union an evil empire. Little did Gorbachev know he would preside over the end of that empire, years later saying, "We could and should have saved the Soviet Union, but we lost politically." The two men clashed famously at their next meeting in Reykjavik, Iceland. But by December of 1987, partly through the influence of Nancy Reagan on her husband, they were at the White House, signing a treaty to reduce the threat of nuclear weapons. The same year, Gorbachev gave his first American television interview to NBC's Tom Brokaw. And by the next year, a return summit in Moscow. The two were walking arm in arm in Red Square. And later, Gorbachev let the Berlin Wall come down without sending in Russian tanks, for which he won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1990. Americans were charmed by this new kind of young Soviet leader with his ideas of glasnost and perestroika, openness and economic restructuring, and his very modern wife Raisa. But back home, his Kremlin colleagues tried to overturn him in a 3-day coup and failed. Gorbachev returned from house arrest in Crimea to find Russian President Boris Yeltsin in charge, and soon resigned. He said to avoid a bloody civil war in a country saturated with nuclear weapons. Mikhail Gorbachev, the man who changed the world but could not save his own country from falling apart.
Andrea Mitchell reporting there. Joining us now, columnist and associate editor for The Washington Post, David Ignatius, and former NATO Supreme Allied Commander James Stavridis. He is chief international analyst for NBC News and MSNBC, Washington bureau chief for USA Today. Susan Page, still with us as well. Good morning to you all. Admiral, if I'm not mistaken, maybe a tear in your eye or a chill up your spine, at least, as you watched President Reagan back in 1987 there.
Boy, talk about perfect timing and delivery by Reagan, but talk about enormous courage, integrity by Mikhail Gorbachev. Really a remarkable moment. You know, Willie, at home I have a strand of barbed wire from the old wall. And every time I walk by it, I think I'm walking by freedom. It hasn't turned out perhaps the way we wanted to. In fact, yesterday someone said to me breathlessly, a Russian leader has died. And I thought, Putin. Turns out, nope, Gorbachev. And, you know, this is Russia. They roll the cosmic dice. One time you get Ivan the Terrible, then you get a Peter the Great. You get Stalin, then you get a Gorbachev. And those dice have landed again on Vladimir Putin, and the world is poorer for it. And we should miss Mikhail Gorbachev, who had his flaws, but delivered so much to this nation, working in concert with a great American president, Ronald Reagan.
He really did, working in concert, and that's the thing. David Ignatius, I remember after Reykjavik, commentators were so shocked that Reagan walked away without doing the deal. But ended up, Reagan knew what he was doing. It's fascinating, though. Through the years, you've had many in America on the left credit Mikhail Gorbachev with ending the Cold War, acting as if Ronald Reagan had nothing to do it. On the right, giving all credit to Ronald Reagan, acting as if Mikhail Gorbachev was not necessary to expedite this. But in reality, they did work in concert. They were partners in history, weren't they?
They were partners, an unlikely partnership to be sure, but Mikhail Gorbachev was a miracle, to use the words that George F. Kennan, who was our ambassador to Moscow, used, architect of the Cold War. And his point was that Gorbachev was a product of the Soviet system. He'd been a party boss in Stavropol, where he's from. He'd come up through the party. He was the Soviet man. And he began to see, as he moved toward the peak of power in the 1980s, that this was a system that was corrupt, it was inefficient, it was broken, and so he thought he could reform it. And it turned out to be a terrible mistake, because the system was so rotten from within that the more change he made, as Andrea Mitchell reminded us, the words glasnost, openness, and perestroika, economic change, the more he tried to do that, the more the system crumbled, until by the end of his time, he was being overwhelmed by more radical forces who wanted to sweep Soviet communism away. It ended so quickly. I find, Joe, great poignancy in thinking about this man, Mikhail Gorbachev, who with Reagan's help, swung the door of this monstrous Soviet regime open, let the fresh air and the sunshine in. And now we've seen that door slam closed again with a despotic leader in Vladimir Putin. Putin has done something in Ukraine that even the worst of the Soviet dictators wouldn't have contemplated. It's really a tragic finale to the story of Gorbachev, almost an accidental reformer who started a process that once it began, simply couldn't be stopped.
An accidental reformer that Anne Applebaum said yesterday after hearing of his passing, said, not many people have it in their power to change the world as much as Mikhail Gorbachev did, even if he didn't start out wanting to do so. And Anne, of course, so right, Admiral, much like Zelensky. I'm sure when he was an actor, he never foresaw the future that he would find himself in the middle of, the history that he would find himself in the middle of. But I do find it fascinating, David, talking about how this evil empire, and yes, Reagan was right, it was an evil empire. They killed tens of millions of their own people. I don't think many people understand the scale of evil that was the Soviet Union, but they killed tens of millions of their own people. And yet, when Gorbachev tried to reform that system, it was corrupt. It collapsed from within. And you talk about history rhyming. We look right now at Putin's Russia, and they try to invade a country and take it over in 3 days. And we see that it is rotten to the core, militarily, economically, culturally. It's this, this guy Putin, who wanted to undo Mikhail Gorbachev's work, actually has presided over a corrupt regime that is just like the Soviet Union before it, rotting from within.